If you are a game artist, you've almost definitely heard of visual storytelling, but you might struggle with the combination of narrative and artistic skills. Visual storytelling is hard enough as it is, but it becomes even more challenging when it comes to games and interactive media. The player may perceive themselves to be in full control and become frustrated when the game does not allow them to experience the story exactly in the way they think they should. But when your story is very linear, it might not be possible to allow the player to move in whatever order they like. Instead, you'll have to trick the player into doing what you want. So, how do you guide a player through a story and through a space at the same time? If this is a problem that you're familiar with, you're in luck because it's the exact issue I will be tackling in this tutorial. I myself am a game artist specializing in 2D and UI, and in this video I will be sharing the method that I use to create areas for games that communicate story, character, or both. While there are some interesting videos and articles out there about visual storytelling, I find that they're usually focused on either the narrative design of the story or the visual design of the environment, whereas I believe that those two work in tandem with each other and should be considered at the same time. One of the reasons I'm making this tutorial is because I've played a lot of games that look like this. While I've played many of these and generally enjoyed them as a way to pass the time, the environments aren't very well designed and lack cohesion. You might have come across these yourself, as they're free-to-play mobile games. That means they're usually made with limited time and resources, so it's understandable that they would be of a lower quality than the average industry favourite. Still, my aim is to show you that even with a small amount of time, you can improve the flow of your level significantly. This tutorial has been made with game artists in mind, so I will not be focusing on art skills but on composition instead. I will explain my process up to the point of a completed artwork, but I won't be going into any techniques, software or hardware I use to make the actual drawing, just the theory behind it. What I'm teaching you can be achieved with anything from the latest Wacom tablet to simple pen and paper. Creativity knows no bounds. As I am a 2D artist, the example I will be creating is a 2D point-and-click environment for my game Lost Souls Limited. It's likely that my method works best for similar artists, but I believe that the principles are applicable to different genres and mechanics. My explanation will only take a few minutes, but I do recommend that you follow along by designing your own environment, as I believe that that is the best way to learn a skill like this. You can put as much or as little time into the exercise as you want, and there's also an optional extra exercise at the end of the video. Let's go back to the examples I used earlier. These two screen caps are taken from the first game in Moby Grow's Can You Escape series, which consists of point-and-click escape rooms. Here I've broken down the order of actions that the player must take to complete the level. As you can see, the resulting flowchart goes all over the place, which is disorienting to the flow of the level, making it more difficult and frustrating to play. On the other hand, there are large sections of empty space in this level. When you look solely at the quote-unquote important objects, they are clustered fairly closely together rather than being evenly spread out over the level, and even when you consider the other objects that have been put here to fill out the room, there are still many portions of bare wall or floor. This narrows down the places where the player is tempted to look, paradoxically making the level easier and more boring. So we have two opposing problems here. Finding a balance between these two can be a challenge, but I do think that the method I'm about to teach you helps to minimize these problems. We'll start with a fairly simple summary of our story. What is the story that you want to tell, and who are the characters involved? Now, I'm using the term story loosely here. It can be as big or as small as you want, or it can simply be a narrative beat in a larger body. I recommend starting on a smaller scale with this exercise. No need for an epic tale of good triumphing over evil just yet. A mundane, everyday task will do. I have my own example here. Jo is a young woman who recently dropped out of college. She is on her way to work, but first she must find her phone and her charger. As you can see, I've taken a very small event from the start of the story. I've also described the character and relevant information about her. Next, let's take a look at the setting. Every story takes place somewhere, and the location is just as important as anything else. The characters and the player's surroundings will influence them, and vice versa. So with that in mind, where does this story take place, and what is the significance of this place to the story? What should this space be communicating to the player? In my example, the story takes place in Jo's bedroom, which looks like a typical student's room. The first area will introduce the player to the main point-and-click mechanic, as well as to Jo, who is the player character. Her room is her most personal space and reflects her character and situation. Next is what I call building blocks. Think about your story. What physical components can you connect to it? These components can be very clear if they already physically appear in the story, but a non-physical factor can still be manifested into an object. For example, Jo has woken up and risen from her bed. It's a new day. In order to find her phone, the player will have to examine the desk. Once they take the phone, they will meet another obstacle. The phone is low on battery. Now they will have to find a charger, which is in the drawer of the desk. Finally, the player will exit the room through the door. Now that you've established the order in which the player will interact with the key components of your space, it's time to think about the flow. Decide in which direction you want the player to move, horizontally, vertically, diagonally, whatever you want, and place the building blocks we just established into this path. This way you've blocked out the most important visual elements. Keep in mind that these building blocks should be fairly evenly divided across the space. A quick way to check this is by dividing the space into sections based on the placement of the key components, as shown here in this example. In my case, I want the player to start at the right side of the screen, and then move to examine the desk in the middle. Once they've completed their objective, they can exit the level by interacting with the door on the left. There are lots of visual tricks you can use to draw a player's eye, and that will be important in this stage. Since I want the player to start here on the right, I want that to be the side that draws their eye first. I've placed a poster here with an image of a skull, as the shape of a face will attract the player's attention. I'll also use black and white contrast in the colours of this poster to make it stand out further, and I will use the same colour contrast on the other important objects. But as I said before, I won't be going deeply into basic art skills in this tutorial. Long story short, there are lots of ways to achieve this, I'm just giving you my example. Now of course this area still has large empty spaces between our building blocks, and we will be filling those up. We won't just be throwing in whatever random filler objects we can think of, however. When you are trying to communicate story or character with your environment, even the non-essential objects should have meaning. Nothing exists in this space without a reason. Everything that is shown, no matter how small, should contain information. Once again, think about the story you're telling, the characters involved in it, the location it takes place in, and even the way the player will move through it. All of these contain details that can manifest themselves into visual details. Like in my example, the room belongs to a student, which you can tell from things like a planner, books, stationery, and a laptop. All the notes on the wall show that she is quite scatterbrained too. We can see that her life isn't just work though, as she has some kind of poster on the wall and even a teddy bear, indicating a softer side. All of this is information that will no longer need to be conveyed through dialogue. The player can figure it out by themselves. Now that we've walked through this process together, I hope you have gained a better understanding of what it means to link your story to your space. To test this out, I have an optional exercise you can do, specifically zooming in on composition and flow. Take another look at these screen caps from Can You Escape? Without worrying too much about the visuals at this point, how would you arrange the objects in these rooms to improve the flow of the levels while still keeping the actions and content intact? Go ahead and pause the video here while you create a sketch or wireframe to illustrate the changes that you'd implement, and once you've finished, return to this video and I'll show you some possible answers. Here I've created some examples of ways to improve the levels we saw earlier. In both cases, I've moved the building blocks around to form a flow from one end of the room to the other. I've also made sure that they are more evenly spread over the space we've been given. In the right side level, I made some additional changes. I darkened the colour of the car as I thought the big splash of bright red attracted too much attention too soon, and instead I've made the carpet brighter and I've angled it slightly to make it point to the starting side, as it were. Of course, there are so many other ways you could have improved upon these levels, and these can be combined with additional changes to things like colour palettes, but I hope I've illustrated my points on composition and flow clearly. If you have an interesting answer of your own that I haven't even come up with, I'd love to hear about it. You can let me know in the comments or contact me through other means. I'll have my socials up at the end of this video and they're also available in the description. Thank you so much for following this tutorial. I hope it was helpful and that more people will approach environmental storytelling with the belief that story and space are intrinsically linked together. I've listed some recommended articles and videos here. The links are also available in the description of this video on YouTube. I'd recommend looking into these if you're interested in this topic or if you would like to see some analysis of it in existing games. I've also linked my socials below, so please feel free to contact me if you have any questions about this tutorial or my work in general. Finally, I've created a Discord server for artists like myself to share their work with the goal to give and receive constructive feedback. Maybe I'll see you there.